Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Indian Expressions for the New Indian Express. I have with me Dr. S.B. Roy, who's the founder and chairman of the Indian Institute of Biosocial Research and Development, and he's dedicated his entire life to tribal development. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Roy. And we also have Sanjay Upadhyay, who's a Supreme Court lawyer who specializes in forest and tribal law. Thank you so much, Mr. Upadhyay, for joining us as well.
Pleasure.
Really, the question today is digital inclusion and tribal development. And we know that while there has been some amount of tribal development, it's obviously not been either inclusive or consistent. And that's something that we need to address clearly with digital technology, but perhaps it hasn't always been possible. So, Dr. Roy, I'd like to begin with you and ask you why, even after so many years of independence, and tribals are almost 8%, if I'm not mistaken, of the Indian population, and yet their poverty levels and their poverty levels are high, literacy levels are low, and there's so many subgroups and groups among the tribals. How can you possibly have one consistent policy without digital inclusion?
This is a very brilliant, rather, question which is disturbing to all of us. That despite so many efforts, law, policy
Yes.
for tribal development, the tribes which are custodian of the rich biodiversity, they are having the pristine forest. They are also having good air, not contaminated food with the chemical fertilizer the way we have.
Right.
They have also a kind of air which is not polluted as we face in Delhi, Calcutta, and Bombay. So while they
Right.
are having pristine forests, rich biodiversity, good air, and water, the tragedy is that malnutrition, disease, even like sickle cell, is predominantly in the tribal area. Why is so? This is the question. Not only that, while they're having so much pristine forest, biodiversity, water, even from the government of India and state government, with very good intention, they have good development process of infrastructure like road, bicycle, uniform, school. But the actual foundation of survival, that is nutritious food and the requirement which is coming out of their own grain is missing. If you see from the satellite report historically, 50 years back, 60 years back, the quality of forest and quality of water, quality of biodiversity, quality of wildlife, quality of the food in the forest, what was there 50 years or before the independence is not here. So in a way, we have been having cosmetic service. That
Right.
means we are having bicycle, uniform, school, infrastructure, water tube, but not the survival for the food, nutritious food. So that is the problem. Although with good intention, people have been working, I'll share with you, but this is the main reason. And I tell you, this problem of tribal, internationally we call it indigenous community. The tribal, the indigenous community, what we see here in India is also a global affair of continuous degradation of the rich forest, loss of biodiversity, and malnutrition globally in all the tribal. So, whole of the foundation on which our survival exists is shaken. And then we are putting something above all, in the name of development. So I think the biodiversity conservation, forest, resource, water, and nutritious food, which is essential for survival, if that is met, the tribal development will be taken care. This is my first reaction about the tribal development, and it is not only for the tribal also. I tell you, this is happening to us also. We all know uh, in the colder December, we have a warmer day. At the desert, we have flood, we have water pollution. So this is all we are having because we address is the climate change. So such a degradation of forest, loss of biodiversity, it's a globally phenomenon accepted that this is causing climate change. This is causing malnutrition to the tribal. This is also causing distress to we all. So sustainable tribal development with a sustainable conservation will address the issue of not only for the tribal, but it will have a issue of the people around them also. It will for us. So this is what I feel.
Yeah, Dr. Roy, I'll come back to you and we'll discuss the whole idea of the development model of
Yeah,
one size fits all, you know.
yeah,
That is the fundamental flaw here.
yeah.
And that's really the reason
Hmm,
why there is this kind of exclusion of tribals. But
hmm.
I'd like to go to Mr. Upadhyay and ask him that there have been so many laws which actually protect the tribals, which enable them to protect their own lands. Why have they not been successful in their implementation?
I was expecting this question. Thank you, Kaveri, first of all, having me here. Um, uh, well, as you rightly put it, constitutionally, there are provisions to protect the scheduled tribe communities. We've been historically thinking about them. Uh, but when we actually came down to legislating for their empowerment, what we did in 1996 with the provisions of Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, and as you know, scheduled areas are the areas which are majority of tribal communities who live there. What happened was we made a very aspirational law. And the problem with a very aspirational law is that it does not become pragmatic. So you may wish a lot of things of self-empowerment, determination, etc., and you can make a framework legislation. But the bottom line is, how do you take that very idealistic sort of aspirational law onto the ground, on people who actually matter in terms of implementation? How do you take that knowledge to the real empowerment of tribal communities? And I think that's where we have missed the bus, really. And why I'm saying that is, if you look at that framework law on PESA, as we call it, the rules that were supposed to be framed in a manner that is understood by anyone, and we're talking about tribal communities, and we're talking about sub tribes, you're talking about particularly vulnerable tribal groups within that, which are far more destitute in that sense. So what we've done is we have not made that framework easily accessible and simple. So that is the first flaw. The second attempt we made in 2006 and 7 with the Forest Rights Act is, again, there were 13 sets of rights. But what we did, and fortunately I was part of the drafting committee of that law, when we thought about that law, it was made pretty simply. There are 13 sets of rights. There was for the first time, 4 departments came together. Ordinarily, only revenue or forest stock, but in this particular law, you had the forest department, you had the revenue department, you have the tribal department, you had the Panchayati Raj department. So all these departments were supposed to come together and enable a Gram Sabha empowerment at the grassroots. Right down at the what is called as the hamlet level, not only the village level, but go down to the hamlet level, the Pali level, the Fala level, or the Fada, all the terms that are used for sub village level units. Now, what we did with these two legislation is we didn't give it a traction to the constitutional body that exists. And the constitutional body that exists, which is supposed to steer all this, is the Tribes Advisory Council, which is the constitutional body. Now the problem, and then of course the governor, who's supposed to have a very special role for administering the scheduled areas. Now, unless these four units come together and in unison talk about tribal empowerment, we can be very happy with all this little literacy program here and a little, art and craft and a little softer things, I call it. So I think the real crux is not digital information, but digital empowerment. And how do you use technology, in this day and age, to really empower these communities with the correct information and the correct provisions in a simplified form. And I think that's where we have lacked. And I have many examples, but I'm going to limit my first reaction like this today.
Dr. Roy, may I just take this question to you
Yeah.
and ask you that why, despite what Mr. Upadhyay is saying, you have these 13 quite simple forest right acts. Why has there not been more emphasis on actually implementing these properly or integrating this framework that exists?
I often share on many platforms that we don't have a dearth of policy. Act is there. Even rules are also there. But what Sanjay Saab mentioned, Upadhyay, the implementation and empowerment. For that only, the digital India trying to reach people and in the form of empowerment, informing them what has to be done. I tell you that universally, what we find that Forest Right Act has not been implemented at all places, but it does not mean that somewhere it is not successful. It has been successful also. The forest community, it has been also been successful. So we have to learn lesson. Why at some places FRA has been successful, why it has not been successful. This is first thing. Secondly, as I mentioned, the tribals are located a forest mosaic landscape which is remotely placed. So reaching tribal remotely is also has been a problem. So this digital India or digital technology or digital learning is one of the devices through which we can reach them. And the visibility will be more clear if they receive information, and also through digital technology, if they learn something which is immediately applicable to them. Not only that, they can also share with them us what are the problem with them. So such kind of digital technology reaching them, which has been found a little successful also. When we discuss about the digital India and involving tribal in the digital learning, we had doubt how the tribals will be who are remotely placed, who are much more in the kind of interior of the forest. They are not aware of the smartphone or digital technology. How they'll be responding to that is a very surprising. I'll share with you. Recently, the government of India has launched a program, Goal, going online as leaders. This is in collaboration with the Facebook. Now, the program was launched the Facebook on the 15th May. It was inaugurated by the Honorable Minister, Mr. Arjun Munda, and it was planned that reaching 5,000 tribal and contacting them, training them as mentee through mentors. So all we had doubt how the tribal will be responding, and it was advertised in the newspaper and through also. And one of the requirement was that the tribal who are willing to participate, they have to apply online. Imagine, first of all, they are located very fast. Secondly, they have to reach online. Third, they have to apply. And with that application, there were certain conditions. That means they have to include some document. They have to have some evidence that they're tribal. They have to have some notion. So such a difficult situation was there, and we thought hardly there will be few hundred applicants. You'll be surprised to know, Kaveri, more than 30,000 tribal applied for it. It was surprising, amazing. This was eye-opening to us how the tribal, so it is our thinking that they will not respond. So I'm telling of our own thinking, our own mental block about understanding the tribal culture, understanding the capacity of the tribal, understanding the cultural strength of the tribal that we often understand. And we call them, beneficiary. So actually, we are beneficiary if they conserve forest, if they have rich biodiversity, if they get involved, we are beneficiary. The world will be beneficiary. But what I'm saying are perception. So more than 30,000 applicants were there, and it was very difficult to decide. And you'll be surprised, nearly one third were from the primitive tribe. We couldn't imagine from PVTG it will be applying. And women also. So what I'm saying that our own thinking, mental block has been really stumbling in the development. This is one. Secondly, we often design training program, education program as following the pedagogy. That means a syllabus which is meant for children in school. But for the tribal education, they are adult, they can think, they can respond, they can be involved. So the approach should be andragogy. So the change in our thinking, change in our approach is so important from pedagogy to andragogy. Another interesting thing, our thinking, it goes on a very fast kind of thing, fast growing, quick bucks. But the tribal's learning is with a slow pace. And this is the strength of the tribal, learning with a slow pace, growing with a slow pace is ecological system. They move with the nature, with a slow pace. And that is one of the condition of sustainability, the going with the nature, ecological form. So this approach with the goal, and there's another from the Digital Ministry of Tribal Affairs, from TriFed, they have a number of outlets. And Kavil will surprise, many of their products are internationally branded, and it comes on the Amazon. So there has been some success. We have to learn wherever it has been successful. Regarding FRA also, in that area, from this digital technology, I was recently negotiating and talking to the many tribals through digital approaches. During lockdown, staying at home at Calcutta, contacting tribals in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar, and in West Bengal also, some part of Madhya Pradesh. It's a very interesting learning came. You know what? I'll just one example. I was talking to them because I'm sharing on the digital technology for the tribal development. I was sharing to them, why don't you, some of you, come here and on the digital, we'll train you. So they called someone at their one place, and through video conference, we're trying to talk to some Baga. After 2 or 3 sessions, slowly the response was not there. Then asked some of the Baga with whom we're talking, why they are not coming. He said, sir, ये बैगा का प्रॉब्लम है आदिवासी, इसीलिए इनका विकास नहीं होता है. I started thinking, look at that, because he tried to follow the way I wanted, and then he said इनका विकास नहीं होगा. I also thought it's a problem. Then I said फिर कैसे होगा. पर देखिए गांव में जहां जहां है ना, हर एक मोहल्ले में बैठना पड़ेगा और मोहल्ले में बैठ के उनसे बात करनी पड़ेगी. कुछ लोगों को एक साथ कॉमन इंटरेस्ट ग्रुप, सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप बनाने से नहीं होगा. then it was a learning to us that what we applied for other caste group, self-help group or common interest group will be not applicable for the tribal. So then we started changing that and said, okay, we'll have a conference in the whole of the hamlet wise. And within few days, it will change. And they have used some technology of their own indigenous of water conservation. Is very surprising. Just before Diwali, in 5 days, they have prepared check dam for water conservation for the FR area of their own without any government support. I put on record, people are listening, without any government support, without any government technology. It was just digital training to the tribal, listening to them and involving them as partner, not beneficiary.
Right.
They had also shared just one. Had also shared some of the very important thing, which is for tribal development sustainability. One was water conservation, very important. Second was identification of some of the rare and endemic species. Those rare and endemic species, which has been holding forest as a hotspot, has been conserved by them, and through short video clipping from there they send me. That means they become the videographer. They had a clipping of the forest. They helped me in identification of the biodiversity. They also on the video they explained to me the use of it Ayurvedic. And last month they have developed Aushadhi Udyan. When I discussed some of the scientists of the Botanical Survey of India, Director Botanical Survey of India, Dr. Mao, he said it is very interesting. We could be collaborating with them, Adivashi, for learning with them on the ethnobotany. So what I'm saying, we have to think upside down. Our approach has, you mentioned in the first question, what has been wrong? Our approach has been making them treating as beneficiary, supplying with the material and giving them what to do instead of involving them as a partner, instead of learning from them on the system, is a more of organic thinking. And what we have got mechanical thinking. So
Right.
shifting from mechanical thinking, we have to think organic society, organic thinking. So this
And
is how the digital approach learning could help them in many ways for the tribal development.
And Dr. Roy, in a way, it means a complete overturning of the architecture of our thinking,
Yeah, yeah,
of the language we use, of
yeah.
the terms we use,
That's
of
right.
the way we think that we are
Huh,
imparting knowledge rather than collaborating on knowledge.
that's
So
right.
it's a 360-degree
Hmm.
turnaround in the way we think.
Yeah.
But Mr. Upadhyay, I want to bring you in here and say that the legal system is still in the era where the sarkar is the my baap and the sarkar is the sort of, in a way, the lord and master still. So our legal framework is exactly the opposite of what Dr. Roy is suggesting, isn't it?
Well, I would disagree slightly, not because I'm a lawyer and I should disagree with everything that you say, but I will disagree as far as the framework is concerned. The
Right.
framework actually was designed in what Dr. Roy just said, was about a bottom up thinking and bottom up decision making. And I think he's hit the nail on the head when he says that it is our de learning which is more important than their learning. So I think that is a very important statement to make, that our de-learning about their existence and their integration and how they should be assimilated, rather than giving them the freedom that they have and that they should have to take those decisions. I think the key here is how are you taking decisions?
Yeah.
And when you take decisions on natural resources, as Dr. Roy said, it is not just natural resources. You know, natural resources is one huge part of their existence. But if you look at the social constructs around which decisions have to be made, for example, what kind of development should happen? You know, who should be mining in that area and not mining in that area?
Yes,
Who
very
should be managing the water there? Who should be managing the forests there? What kind of social sector development program should come in? What kind of mechanisms do you use to identify beneficiaries? How do you grant a utilization certificate to the government of how best they have developed or implemented a program? How do you identify beneficiaries in that language? Which is, I totally agree with Dr. Roy that stop calling them beneficiaries. It is their right to be the way they are,
yes.
and the choices are theirs.
Mhm.
The framework has to enable them. So if you look at that, is why when I said PESA was a very aspirational law, it talks about a bottom up approach.
That's right.
But the trouble is that the Babu on that ground doesn't understand that construct. And therefore, we have to make it very simple when you're talking about a simple thing like money lending. The law says now that it is the Gram Sabha of the hamlet which is the decision maker of how much money can be given at what interest. But unless you change the Money Lenders Act, you're not going to get there. Same with minor minerals auction, for example. Unless you change the minor mineral concession rules, you're not going to get there. Unless you change the forest law, which is dominating, over the FRA, you're not going to get that real tribal empowerment. I mean, we have the TriFed talking about One Dhan Yojana and 3.6 lakhs people have been approached and benefited, etc. Again, the approach is very similar. Government giving doles, and that is, as I was saying earlier, that is only a very soft way of looking at it. Government promoting tribal culture, government promoting tribal art. These are very soft things which are important. But the key is how are you involving them in decisions that impact them. So, when it comes to big ticket things of real decision making, they are nowhere there. And unfortunately, it is not the law which fails them. The law, both PESA, both FRA, both the constitutionality of the Tribes Advisory Council, the role of the governor, all these four elements actually talk about the same thing. In fact, you'll be surprised when you look at a law like PESA, etc. It says, notwithstanding the constitution, which means it is even above the constitution. That means whatever the constitution has said, this is over and above that is what we are saying, for tribal empowerment. So if you look at the text of that law, it is absolutely fabulous. But when it comes to real thing on the ground, the entire system mechanism that we create is the same old structure. So unless we think and not just tinker, unless we move the structure around, the same DM is supposed to understand PESA and FRA and start talking about in the same language. Now, that particular district magistrate or the block development officer or that circle inspector that we're talking about or that Gram Panchayat secretary that we talk about, unless they have to be completely unlearning what they have been doing for the past 100 years or so, and if they do that, and the law enables it, fortunately the law enables it. It's just that the communication of the spirit of this law is not met on the ground. And unless we are serious about it, I mean, we can do all kinds of soft talk, but unless we are serious about them to be in the decision making process, we are not going to get there. And one more point I want to add there is there's a huge divide between urban tribals and rural tribals. The
Yeah.
lot of decision making are by urban tribals who are, the Minas, etc. And there's a whole politics about that, how they got into the tribe status in the first place. So there is a very dominant tribal elite also, which is taking decisions. It is not the PVTGs. I'm so glad to hear when Dr. Roy said that so many PVTGs have applied. And I really hope that it is them who have applied and not some proxy fellow who's applied on behalf of them. Because my experience with PVTGs in Chhattisgarh, etc., when we went there in villages like Joli Bilma in Ambikapur, etc., and we were talking about habitat rights. Now, habitat right is a concept that gives you the entire control of natural resources in your area and
Yeah.
how you will really delineate that particular resource and manage it. Now, the role of the government, unfortunately, is only facilitative. The forest department, the revenue department, the panchayat department, the revenue, all of them, tribal department, they are supposed to enable you to take those decisions. And this is where we are missing the bus. One example I'll give you and I'll stop is we tried an experiment called the One Adhikar Resource Center in Jharkhand, where one of the things we do as law firms, very uniquely, I must add, is something called advice and referral service. That means if there is a little Q&A, if you ask a question, you'll get an answer. So, if somebody asks you, who is the authority to identify a beneficiary for a program of, let's say, Indira Awas Yojana in those days, or the Pradhan Mantri Gram Awas Yojana? The answer was, it is not the criteria set up by the DM, which is flowing from the state. The criteria was supposed to be developed by the people themselves, the Gram Sabha itself. And I think this is where we are missing the bus, because there is no integration bottom up. We are still in that top down, doling out thinking mode. And unless we change that structurally, institutionally, we are not going to get there. We have to have a different structure altogether.
Mr. Upadhyay, are you suggesting that the DM and the DC on the ground will have to be replaced, or an additional officer will have to be placed to create this kind of sensitivity? That cannot happen, obviously.
So, no, what I'm saying is that within that overall structure, if you ask a DM today, any DM today,
Yeah.
what is the distinction between a scheduled and a non-scheduled area?
Yeah.
The only answer you'll get is that an Adivasi is supposed to be the Sarpanch in scheduled area, and that's it. It ends there. So, what I'm talking about is a special area of administration. And that has to flow not from the DM, but the governor himself or herself. The governor has been given a very central role in how to administer tribal dominated areas. But today, if you ask the governor's office of how do they fill up that form which they are supposed to represent the government, the president of India every year, you will not even find that format properly, which reflects this special area of administration concept. So I'm not saying do away with the DM. I'm saying the DM may be there, but there have to be a parallel structure which has to specially look at areas which are tribal dominated. What we have done again is we have done ITDAs, Integrated Tribal Development Agency areas. Now ITDAs are not empowered enough under the current legal system to override a DM's decision, for example, for tribal areas. So we have to think very differently for these areas. Maybe in that overall architecture may be same, but you have to have a specialized institution for special areas of administration. And the constitution recognizes it. It's not something new that I'm saying.
May I ask, Dr. Roy, whether something like this has succeeded anywhere to your knowledge?
Yes.
Where the governor has been, where the governor has been very proactive, the governor has actually taken an interest, the governor has actually created this special zone.
There has been, I tell you, that's why in the beginning I said that we have to learn from many of the success stories, and we have to also learn from the failure also. I told you about the government thing. I mean, even the outsider people like we, what do we think? Under FRA, some land is allotted, and they said this is their land for agriculture, farming, or conservation, say 3 acre, 4 acre, whatever acre. But while talking to them and understanding about the concept of the forest or the land, the tribal consider the forest is there. Now, when the whole body is there, and then you say you have to take care of heart only. Somebody was given the kidney, you look after the kidney. And I was given by the lungs. No, you look after the lungs. So we have splitted the forest, which is interdependent as a body, into pieces. So this has been one of the problem of understanding on the FRA of the landscape. This is one. Secondly, uh, they value the tree not as a tree. With their culture, the tribal consider the tree, the wildlife, the nature, they have a spiritual connect with them, and they consider as a immortal, a kind of a god and goddess. They have a sacred groove. They worship. They value. So to them, economic return is not calculated the way we calculate minor forest produce, the timber, the value. In fact, in one of the discussions, they mentioned that you think the timber value, what is the value of my haddi? Haddi की क्या कीमत है? मैं मर जाऊंगा तो हड्डी. Don't value my haddi. Think how I'm living. Look at that. So we outsider scientists, we consider the timber value, the non-timber value, the MAP, the market rate. We have to think the timber, non-timber, wildlife, water as integrated body. And splitting has become very dangerous. Is that this duality, either this or me? No, not that. We have to both together. I'll give one example on this. What you have mentioned is a similar example of that on success or on the how they perceive about the property or notion. In one of the occasion, we were trying to understand what kind of the food is in there. So some of the tribal, they are having still in good condition, and they do not have as much malnutrition prevalent in other. And through our study, it was found they still conserve the indigenous seed. They don't use hybrid seed. They do not use chemical fertilizer. They have their own natural fish. And also, I don't know, but many people know, and those who study with the tribal, they have say 50 or hundreds of cow, but the hardly tribal take milk out of the cow. So we have a notion, ए बेकार इतना जानवर रखा है, इसे 10 ठो जर्सी गाय रख ले तो कितना दूध होगा. But so many cows, how they are nursing with the cow dung, with the leaf, the hooves integrated, this has not been understood very well in case of FRA implementation, because that is in the compartment. So I don't know, I'm not talking against the FRA, in favor of FRA or against FRA. I'm talking of the how tribal view their landscape, how they view the seed. In one of the interesting thing, a little different thing I'm saying about the women empowerment. We often talk of women empowerment. So while talking to some of the tribal, I asked them, महिलाओं को सशक्तिकरण. So he was asking, what do you mean by that? I said, मैंने उनको ज़्यादा क्षमता दिया जाए, उनको ज़्यादा सोचने दिया जाए. Let them think, let them say. So asking, what kind of say? And then he said, in all our family affair, where is the seed, indigenous seed kept? I'm talking of the PVTG. They know much better. So while searching, we were having a seed bank to conserve the very precious seed, like millet or maize, which has got more value, even internationally. So interestingly, all the women, they were having conserved the seed with them. And they know much better about the small farming. Now ecologists mention small farming is more sustainable than larger farming. So we were thinking about the women empowerment, महिलाओं की सशक्तिकरण, but with the PVTG we found the women are more knowledgeable compared to the men. They hold the key. Men also value them. They understand the family business. Not only that, they also know which are the area in the whole forest land moving around is more nutritious from the point of view of the cultivation. So many of our notion about the women empowerment or tribal development or the larger farm, agriculture farm for more food production has been found our thinking, which is not relevant for the sustainable agriculture, and sustainable development of the tribal. So those notions we have to understand that. Yeah, Sanjay is saying something.
Yeah, I
Yes,
was
yes,
just adding on. You
yes,
asked Kaveri about some proactive governors,
yes.
and I remember working a little bit with Shekhar Duttji in Chhattisgarh when he was the governor, and fortunately he was the chief secretary before he was the governor, so he
Oh,
really understood administration pretty well. And when I asked him, and we were discussing FRA and we were talking about PESA implementation, and one of the things he told me, and I remember correctly, is that the format within which you're supposed to report to the president is still a 1989 format. So
Mm.
we have not really adapted the new legislative framework in the reporting format itself, let
yes,
alone what he's supposed to report back. And I think what is unfortunate is that governors, and with all due regards to them, honorable governor, is they have not really understood their role in the constitutionality of things and the constitutional framework that we have. It is not out of place to go beyond a council of ministers, which is the norm, as far as scheduled areas are concerned.
yes,
Historically, we have to understand why these areas were made in the first place. There's a very interesting saying that history or tradition is the past of the present for the future. So unless you really understand historically why excluded area, the concept of scheduled areas came from excluded areas, from partially excluded areas, and tribal areas. These were the three categories if you look at all the Tucker Commission and the Bordoloi Committee reports, etc. So there was a purpose in why we had created scheduled areas. Whether and people don't understand the distinction between fifth scheduled areas and sixth scheduled areas, which are northeastern states,
Yeah.
and only 4 out of the 8 states are with six scheduled areas. Many people think the whole of Assam is scheduled areas. Only 3 out of 27 districts are scheduled areas. So the trouble is we have not understood what is the meaning of special areas of administration. And in Northeast, of course, you have the sixth schedule and the Hill Council, the Autonomous Hill Council, which is supposed to be the custodian of those areas. But in the plain areas, it is the governor and the Tribes Advisory Council which has to play a very important role. But I have never seen Tribes Advisory Council meetings happening, with the same fanfare of how they need to relook at this whole structure. And I think this is where we are missing, and that's why I relate to those examples. So unless the governor is well versed, and I remember in the previous government, I think Mr. Chandradev was the tribal minister, and he was kind of familiar with this whole role of governor thing. And he used to, I remember him writing letters to governors as to how these areas should be managed differently. So there have been people, in bits and pieces, few and far between, who have thought about this. But I think largely governor postings are very, uh, uh, nice and plush, I think. I remember another gentleman, Mr. Rajkhoa, who was appointed the governor of Arunachal. Of course, he had to step down with a lot of controversy. Again, was trying to do very similar things about the special state of Arunachal, for example. Constitutionally, again, Arunachal is different. It is not a scheduled area state. It is a special state. So I think somewhere we have to understand this whole framework, and we
right.
have to attack. In fact, people say that LWE today, left wing extremism, has risen because we have not really, and it's a very touchy subject for many, we have not looked at the forest and the scheduled area governance together. If you just combine these 13 rights in FRA and 14 subject matter empowerment in PESA, these 27 things is the key to all the ills of what is called as tribal life today as we see it. And it's
Right.
all there. It's not rocket science. It is very simple. You just have to make them known to people who are governing rather than people who are beneficiaries, so called.
Right.
I think we have to change that, and I think we will find a way.
When we look at tribal development, that really sometimes to me seems to be the ideal way of living. The West is now talking about slow food, slow living. This really is what the tribals have been doing all their lives. And suddenly it's become fashionable in the West. And I'm sure at some point we will re import it like we re imported yoga. So, how can we learn from them and actually make that thought mainstream rather than trying to make them part of what we think is the mainstream?
Uh, this is again a very common question, and I'm used to reply this question with an example I often share, that in front of a few blind people, when elephant was brought to them to describe elephant, you know how they describe. The development is also like that. Sanjay will say something, SB Roy will say something, Kaveri will say something, and the third person, no, tribal development means this. But there should be some standard scientific method which can be applied universally. When I say universally means like with Santhal, Lodha, or anywhere or outside also. And one can compare what happens when the tribal development process starts from the baseline, how you compare. So for that, standard scientific method is Human Development Index, HDI. And from the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, the document also for the tribal development process, it is mentioned that Human Development Index, that means HDI, which has got three components: health, that means what is the kind of mortality, fertility, malnutrition, this can be calculated. Education, education does not mean MSc PhD degree, is a first of all which can be calculated is enrollment in the school, and more importantly problem solving ability. And the third is what resource they have got for a decent way of life. So the health condition, mortality, fertility, or the malnutrition can be calculated of one village. One can check the record of the education, skill development, competency of problem solving, and from the economic data, what kind of resource they have got per family for a decent survival. So these three components makes Human Development Index. What happens even with us also, that in some village education program has been launched, another organization in some other area they have been doing very good on health, and in somewhere in some village, some district, people are working for the livelihood. So imagine somebody is working on the ailment checking of the heart of one person, another person is treated for the kidney, and the fourth person is treated for something else. You can't have a consultative health for one person. So for the same village, for the same landscape, all the vertical of health, education, and livelihood has to be launched together. And a baseline has to be studied before the program is launched. And then periodically, if I evaluate and calculate, then you can have an index which can be compared within state, nationally, and internationally also. There's a human. So this is the three parameters which can be considered of that, and one can have a consolidated kind of a development of the tribal, not address or not on the culture itself, or not on the how much knowledge they have got, or what with that. So consolidated health, knowledge, and resource. This makes Human Development Index for tribal development for any kind of human, which can be compared and improved, and can be a good learning the drawback why it is not improving.
If I have to respond, if I have
Yes.
to respond to that first question that you said, let me just give you a small example. I was appointed as the Supreme Court commissioner to look into the Jarawa tribes issue. I remember, if you remember, the Andaman Trunk Road controversy and whether it should go through the Jarawa Tribal Reserve or not. And me and Justice Dwabia, who was also a Supreme Court advocate after he retired, so both of us were sent to Andamans to give Justice Singhvi a report as to whether tribal reserve, where resorts are coming, whether it should exist and what should happen and so on and so forth. And after really examining the whole issue, me and Justice Dwabia had two different reports. He did not agree with something that I wanted to write. And what I wanted to write, in which I wrote after my meetings and my going to all these places, is that next time don't send a lawyer to solve an anthropological problem. Because we are not competent to resolve issues which perhaps anthropologists or ecologists who understand that language, that culture more, and obviously the then judge was not very happy with my report, because he thought, we are supposed to give all the wisdom that is required to improve the Jarawa issues. And the reason I said that is when I saw the great Andamanese, there were just 11 families, or the issues of Shompens or the issues of Sentinels, I realized that we should not interfere too much at all. It is their choice, their living. And if they choose to do something, and if we can just support, then that is the best form of existence. And I'm not talking about pickling a culture. I am talking about allowing them to organically evolve the way they want to, just like every one of us has done. I was in Jamshedpur, I have come to Delhi, I went to the US, I am back, and these are my choices. I make from a Jharkhand state to Delhi to US or wherever. So I think that is something that we need to do. And the answer to answer your question, the kind of traditional knowledge that exists, the kind of traditional ecological knowledge that exists, the kind of framework that is supposed to have developed. For example, there's a concept in Biodiversity Act called the People's Biodiversity Register, which they are supposed to make and document the way and manner in which they are supposed to manage the community forest resource under the Forest Rights Act. These are tools that are there. I think the trouble is how we recognize them. How do we give them value? Today, we don't give them value. We think we have granted them something. The state has given this largesse. Sorry, they always had it. Let us start respecting and recognizing them. I think that is the biggest thing we can give, if we want to give still, is to recognize their supremacy of knowledge of ecosystems that we just do not have. And I think that is what our formal systems have failed, and we really need to improve that so that they are totally in line. I mean, why shouldn't a traditional knowledge expert be equated with an MBBS today? Why not? They must be. And I think this is where we have to change some structures so that they are given the place that they deserve. And in many occasions, they are far superior. And as you rightly said, we probably have to import these knowledge systems when they go abroad, and we have to re-import, to recognize their value. And I think this is where we need to really take some real hard steps and not just soft steps that we've been taking so far.
That why so many problems exist. What Sanjay had mentioned, if I have to learn from them, if I have to share what I want, the digital learning of the day is the only established to reach them, learn from them, share with them. This is one. Secondly, changing our attitude to make it compatible from pedagogy to andragogy, considering them not beneficiary but partner. And what Sanjay has mentioned also, valuing their knowledge as superior in many cases, and we'll be also sharing with them. It's not that if we don't know anything, they know everything. So this collaboration is very, very important, and that is possible through digital learning. And this has been learned that whatever technical, mechanical knowledge we have got, I'd like to emphasize on that, engineering we have got to develop and prove our GDP in terms of how many ventilators we have produced, how many PPE have produced, and establish how much knowledge we have got. This has got no value when we came to know that the indigenous community having better immunity
Mhm.
with their indigenous knowledge is much valuable than your knowledge of proving that I have made so many ventilator. Keep your ventilator, and then you understand immunity, indigenous knowledge, and the natural ecosystem is more important. This is being told by United Nations and every alternate day, World Health Organization, every alternate day, UNDP and FAO establishes that natural resource conservation, immunity is more important than your scientific and mechanical skill. So thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. Bada maja aaya.
No, and I just wanted to make one point here that I think the humility that both of you have, despite so much knowledge and despite knowing so much, is, I think, precisely the kind of approach that our leaders need to have when they look at tribal development, to learn from them, to collaborate rather than to impose their own ideas and their own thinking on them. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for knowing so much and yet being so humble. Thank you very much. It was a
Thank
wonderful
Thank you
you.
so much.
discussion.
Thank you so much,
Thank,
Kaveri. It's
Kaveri,
a
we
pleasure
enjoy
being here.
talking to you. And
thank,
I know how much homework you have done and you ask questions. Enjoy. Thank you, Kaveri. Thank you so much. Thank you,
thank
Sanjay.
you
Maza
very
aaya.